eating all of that?
No, you're good. You can keep going.
So, thank you. They were kind enough to offer us some space. We're down in what I call the dungeon. We're down in the basement, but it really is a pretty warm space. We are the only collegiate recovery community in town. And so through one of our citywide prevention agencies, we try to stay connected and provide services to all students of higher education in the Omaha area. So if we do events of any kind, really push that information out and welcome anybody else who wants to come onto our campus to join us. So I do a lot of stuff on our campus and wear a lot of hats, and it's a lot of good fun. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here today, which is cool. We are going to start this off with a little experiment. And so I'm going to need you to participate in this. So you are going to need some sort of electronic device to get yourself, primarily a phone, I think would be, because you have a QR code to link you up with this. This is a quick survey. And it really has to do with what I thought I would do as far as a presentation for you here today. So I'm going to ask you to answer these questions.
Do you want me to plug?
And yes. And we're going to see our results.
Do they need to do anything to access the Slido?
Wait. Yeah.
Start interaction.
Now go back to the presentation.
Okay.
Okay. There it is.
Yes.
Right there. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. We put it side by side.
We can. Like that?
Yeah.
Now let's see.
Yeah.
So this one,
Hopefully, anyone who is joining us on Zoom can also be able to get in there.
yeah, let me just pull this over. That was just a vacation.
There we go. Yeah. That'll work.
That work for now, and then when
Yeah.
we come back to this, we can just do the full slide again. I don't know if I know.
Thank you for the tech support. I greatly appreciate it.
And then if you want to progress with your thing, just make sure it's back on the presentation mode.
Okay. Since I don't know how many of you there are, not really sure which one to be. So. Give it a little bit. Some numbers. So these 4 questions are, this is a real, survey. Just take a look at who's in the room and who is a part of our own group. And I wanted to do this because I think this is the foundation of being able to have the conversation about alcohol. Because I think we make a lot of assumptions, and a lot of those assumptions are perhaps incorrect. So you can see on here that vast majority of this room, so roughly 82%, if we're drinking alcohol at all, we are using that less once per week. And all I'm doing is asking about how many times you drink, not how much you drink or what you drink. So it's just one aspect of that. And one of the interesting things I think that this shows is that there are a lot of folks who identify as non-drinkers. And I think when we talk about college drinking, identifying college students as non-drinkers is not really a part of our thought process, typically have a pretty strong association between higher education and alcohol consumption. And if you think about conversations that you have, like maybe you don't run into this, but I when I run into people who are, relatively close to my age, they ask me where I work, they ask me what I do, and they are like, "Oh man, I bet you are really busy with all of those college students and their drinking." And I, try to share with them, it might not be exactly what you think it is. It might be less than that. But we have a hard time kind of wrapping our mind around that sometimes. So just a brief way of being able to take a look at what that is. So hang on to those numbers and think about this too. When you're going through that, let's see, I want a slideshow from current slide, right? Okay, there we go. As you're answering those questions, you can think about this for yourself. Did you misrepresent? Did you identify that you drink more than you actually drink, or did you identify that you drink less than you actually drink? Or did you identify yourself as a non-drinker when you're not really a non-drinker? In other words, did you lie when you answered it, or did you consider it truth? And I think that's a really great question, because when we are, trying to put together information about college drinking, a lot of folks look at the numbers and look at what we come up with as identifying what our norms are. And folks have a hard time accepting that it's real. They're like, everybody lies when they go through this. I would challenge that and say that most people are answering it honestly when they're going through it. And so I think the numbers that we get are decent, useful numbers. So what I wanted to do was talk about what norms are. Norms are the way that we learn to have the conversation about college drinking. Where do we get data to establish those norms? What does that data tell us? And then how is that useful to us? And then how is that data useful to you? So norms were added to the world of prevention several decades ago by helping us to answer the question about college drinking. Do college students drink alcohol? The answer to that is yes. And back in the 1970s, some folks started asking this question about, why do you drink so much? And you are relatively close to my age. I remember this. There was a famous T-shirt that was made in the back of the 1970s that said, "I don't have a drinking problem. I get drunk, I pass out, I fall down, no problem." And, kind of answering this idea that it was normal for us to drink. It was normal for us to drink heavily. And so some folks started saying, well, maybe we should challenge that a little bit and start figuring out how we gather some information about what the reality is of college drinking, and then take that information and present it to students and say, hey, it may not be what you think it is. Norms are, to me, our most powerful tool, because I certainly am not going to go to a college student and say, hey, don't drink, you're under 21, because telling college students not to drink is a dumb idea. It is a part of what we do, but I think those of us who choose to not drink or choose to drink minimally need to know that there are people out there who are very much like us, more so than we. So the norms, they give us this way of being able to correct our misperceptions about college drinking and challenge the idea that maybe our peers, our fellow students, don't drink as often as we think they do. They don't drink the same amounts that we think they do. And be able to reflect on what is it that I'm doing and am I close to what is normal for our campus? And be able to examine that and make whatever choices it is that we're going to make at that. So our reality is when we ask students about why do you drink, they say, I do it to have fun. And you know, what's fun about it? And they can make a list. And is there anything about it that's not fun? And yes, there's a nice list about what those things are. And oddly enough, the things that are not fun are associated with high risk drinking. They're associated with drinking at higher levels. Really, why am I in college? My job is to get a degree and to move on with my life. My job is not to get derailed. That's not my goal. So if my goal for drinking is to have fun, I take a look at how often and how much. If my goal is to graduate, or perhaps I'm also working a job, am I able to sustain a very heavy pattern of alcohol use and manage all the rest of that? And for most students, the idea is that they're not really doing that. So the partiers, the heavy drinkers, the high risk drinkers, they are definitely there. We're none of us who work in prevention at higher education think that they're not, because they are just not the norm. They are not the majority. So we use a couple of different ways of being able to put some information together. We use the college behavior profile on our campus. Yeah, okay. So that's also used here. And that is something that as a student, well, actually anybody that's here has access to it. You can go through it, you can put some information in it. It is a tool that gives you immediate feedback and challenges that thought process that you have about what other folks are doing. There's a good chance that you're close, right? If you've been here for a while. The ones who are the farthest out, the ones who have the most misperceptions are our freshmen who are coming onto campus of higher education for the first time. And they're getting their information from where? About college drinking. Where is it coming from before they get it? Social media, yep. Where else? Peers, yep. Where else? Parents, mainstream media, right? How we're represented, movies, television programs. Yeah, so they get a lot of that information, and the images that they're putting out there is not you sitting in the back of the room having a normal time and having one drink. That's not the way it's presented. So they're showing up here with already a misperception, and they're like, where's the party? Where do I find this? You know, you come to our campus, and our campus is, if you don't know anything about Illinois campus, we're primarily a commuter campus. We don't have a large footprint of students who are living in our housing. I think we have 2,200 beds, something like that. So it's really pretty small. Our students, when they move in, it's right there on their lease contract. Just to let you know, alcohol is not allowed on the property, and it's not allowed in the buildings. And really, we're not going to sanction that. Probably 2% of people that live there are under 20. So we're certainly not. But that's not the way they think about it when they read it. Otherwise, I wouldn't get all the students I get with violation. So they look at that and they're like, who's actually going to stop me? This is college. We're supposed to drink. And until they get a violation, and then they can see. So we use the college behavior profile as part of our intervention process with those students to say, hey, go through this and take a look at the choices that you're making, and take a look at how you are reflected compared to other students, and gives them some immediate feedback. So this is one place that we get data. Another place that we get data is with the National Alcohol College Health and Behaviors National Association. I forget what the A is on that. Oh, assessment. It's right there. I have this problem with reading at eye level. So This is a survey that we do every 2 years as part of our participation in our city prevention coalition and our state coalition. There are a lot of schools in the state of Nebraska that participate in the notch. And this allows us to get some really good data that is statewide on multiple topics. But alcohol use and use of other substances is also a big part of this. So in participation or cooperation, I guess, with our college behavior profile, we have two different sources, places that we can gather data and see what the environment is like with our students and use that to guide whatever interventions it is that we are going to put out there to use. So this is where we get this. This is where we get the data. What our data tells us is something about the reality. And so this comes from, for our 7 Omaha schools, this comes from the Notch B. Here is what's typical. So think about the questionnaire that I had you fill out at first, and think about your responses to that. You can answer those. So we find out that really drinks per occasion is around 2, typically around once a week. Somewhere around 3 drinks per week. Or around 4 times per month, that's right in that neighborhood. And most students do not approve of drinking and driving. That turns out a really important statistic for us. 10% identify as high risk drinking or having some sort of concern for themselves. That's pretty reflective of the general community when we look at folks who consume alcohol at all. So one of the questions that I had on the brief survey that I gave you was 3 times, or more, per month. So there are some of us who are going to fall into that high risk kind of range. And what do we mean by high risk? We got to have a definition for that. And that is based in health. And the way that we define it is 4 drinks or greater per occasion for women, 5 drinks or greater per occasion for men. And that is potentially like over a 2-hour period, which is enough to push us right up to that limit or that line of around 0.07, which, like 0.06, 0.05, 0.07, right in that range, we're going to have our best response to alcohol consumption if we are choosing to drink. When we get above that, now we open the door for potential problems. And I think having a definition for what is high risk is important. We try to get away from, like old words that we've used in the past, things like binge drinking, things like being drunk. Those are all very relative terms, and there are as many different definitions for them as there are people. So we'll get away from those words that are describing a combination of behaviors and look strictly at how do we define this in terms of health. So pretty close to what we had in our room. A lot of students identify as non-drinkers. And the majority of people, if they are out, are using a designated driver and avoiding the drinking and driving. So there is going to be some of that. And I think that's an important piece to keep in mind because it is associated with high risk drinking. And I've met a number of students who have had problems with law enforcement because they were doing the right thing in the wrong way. In other words, they found themselves in a high risk situation. They made the decision to remove themselves from that situation and decided to drive after they were drinking. So they had the right idea in mind. I got to get out of here. This is not good for me. But the choice that they made to drive was not a good choice. But making that choice under the effects of alcohol, we're going to make an impaired decision. We have an impaired thinker that we're using that. And that tells us something about how it's possible for us to drink and drive or be a passenger in a car with someone who has been consuming alcohol, because we're in the best frame of mind for making that decision. That's an important piece. And I think that's where the designated drivers have an opportunity to establish that before we do anything else, then we reduce our risk of drinking and driving. So our prevention efforts, and so our two coalitions, of which Jenny Kissinger is a part of, is the Omaha Collegiate Consortium. And so we, as a group, realized that you all interact with other people, other students in higher education from other schools, maybe in similar environments. So we are crossing paths with each other. So it makes sense for us to look at data that is personal to our school. How does it compare to other schools? And do we see similar issues and similar problems? And the answer to that is yes. That gives us this idea that we probably should use some very similar prevention strategies, and we can coordinate those strategies between the campuses. So here when college behavior profile, here's the challenging piece. And so, you know, what do most of our first years put in there? Their guesses are that their peers drink 12 times a month, that their peers drink 7, 6, 7, 8 drinks per occasion. And these are way outside of what our campus norms are. And so as we are communicating and working on prevention strategies amongst all of our campuses, we're able to put these pieces of information out there and say, hey, did you know that the majority of us are not doing this, that the majority of us are making some really good choices, that we are not, you know, getting into the high risk drinking and the high risk circumstances that are typically associated with college alcohol use. So this is really useful information as we work together. So this also gives you an opportunity to challenge yourself and challenge your own thought process, putting safety and health first, and understanding what is the reality about college drinking. So reference that I made earlier, so I run into people who find out what I do and they find out where I work and the statements that they make. That puts me in a position to say to them, it might not be what you think it is. Is there some potential for that to be much lower than what you think it is? And be able to correct that. So I think there's a lot of power in that. And I say that because when I get students in who get policy violations for alcohol in their space, there might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them from that one room. And they get that write-up. And initially they're terrified because they think they're going to have something on a legal record. And, you know, we got to stop and think, what's my degree worth? Because if I'm looking at a career where I'm interacting with other folks, education, you know, counseling, athletic training, something like that, having an alcohol charge sitting on a legal record is potentially a speed bump for us, right? This is something that, you know, we're going to have to figure out. That's not what happened, but they're terrified about that. And they come and see me, and we get to talk about their responses to the college behavioral profile, and talk about their choices with substance use. Most of the students I talk to are not real high risk drinkers. They take that conversation and they talk not only to their roommates who were also involved in it, but they're talking to everybody else that's in the room around them. And so this conversation about, hey, did you know this? That this is not, you know, as much as you think it is, and that it's not as prevalent as you think it is. And that there are some similarities in the numbers from UNO to Bellevue to Clarkson to College of St. Mary to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And I could probably take this and push it all the way out to the states within our region, because I know folks who do this same type of work at Kansas, at Iowa, at Minnesota, at Michigan, at Colorado, and their numbers are very similar to ours. It turns out that most students in higher education are not looking to have alcohol-related problems. They're not looking to get arrested. They're not looking to get kicked out of housing. They're not looking to fail out of school. That is very typical, not just here, but also outside of that. And those are important facts. Those are things that as an individual, if I take the opportunity to correct that thought process with other folks, then maybe the stigma can change a little bit. I don't know. The stigma is pretty stiff right now. But it starts with little pieces, right? So, reality, most of our students are not drinking and driving. Most of our students are not riding around with folks who are drinking and driving. Over the past 8 years or so, with the changes in marijuana laws across the country, we have started to add some questions about marijuana to our college behavior profile, which was strictly alcohol for a really long time, because alcohol is the preferred substance of higher education. So, but that environment has been shifting and changing. Turns out that we have some stats about using marijuana and driving or riding with a potentially impaired driver. And these numbers, you can see they're a lot higher than with alcohol. And I think part of that is because the science and getting the information about the science out there to students and indeed the general public about how marijuana use potentially impacts your driving, and for how much time can we get that science out there and start lowering those numbers. Hopefully that happens. But I think there's a little bit of a disconnect, at least from folks that I have talked to, because they think, well, I was smoking like an hour ago, I'm fine. And not really recognizing that level of impairment because they don't feel like they're under the influence at the time. And science tells us that there's some stuff that's very different about that than perhaps what we thought. So here's another opportunity for you to challenge yourself and the folks around you. How'd I do? Thanks a lot for allowing me to come here and throw some information out there. I talk fast, and so I haven't had any opportunities to allow you to ask any questions. But does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Thanks, Professor comment. So on that last, I guess, statistic, it said that 25% of marijuana users report riding someone who had alcohol or somebody who had been using marijuana. So it's not okay.
It's around 20% per passenger.
So the drinking was actually slow. Or. And the last thing it said about marijuana,
Really?
really?
Oh, driving after drink. Okay, that's a typo on my part. That's not what that should say. That should not be alcohol. Thanks, Julie. Say that. Yeah, this right here. Ooh, does this have a little? Yeah, that right there should say. That should be marijuana right there.
I don't see statistics about people that vote.
We have not asked those questions. That's a good question. Something good for us to maybe consider for the future.
Mark, could you talk a little bit about, like the Good Samaritan laws, if you're with someone and you're trying to get them help, and then maybe also too about like amnesty policy?
Yes, you can access the Good Samaritan policy on the the state website and county website. And the amnesty and the Good Samaritan policies were put in place to prevent folks who are having an alcohol-related emergency from not getting help. Because the people who are around them are thinking, well, if we call for emergency services, we're all going to get arrested. And so those policies allow folks to call for emergency services without fear of winding up with an arrest. And we have had those experiences, oddly enough, on our campus. And yes, the state is not writing them charges for minor possession. But if it does happen on campus, they're still coming. So, our campus policy is still going to allow us to do the prevention part.
Yes, I want to know your thoughts. My daughter is in high school, so of course she knows much more about the world than I do. And I try to have conversations with her, and she made a comment to me recently that she feels like attitudes around drinking are probably similar as attitudes about smoking tobacco were, in that it's gone from like something that maybe when I was in college was very normalized to being viewed rather negatively now. And so, and you mentioned kind of the environment shifting a little bit. Do you think that's true? Do you think that college students or the typical college students have kind of moved on in a lot of ways from like former drinking behaviors that we still consider typical?
That's a good question. I don't think so. And I'm going to say that because I looked at the results of the college behavior profile since 2009 and on our campus, and the numbers there's very little variance. Every once in a while, there's a percentage point up or down across the board, but not much. So it kind of remains a part. To me, it's like a part of the culture. So
I think that's a great point. It's just understanding, is it kind of a flat, steady? And then my next follow-up would be, are there other types of drugs or alcohol that have kind of picked up in, let's say, use? So whether that's marijuana or whether that's fentanyl or something like that, that you guys have noticed.
That's also a really good question. So alcohol remains number one by a long list. Marijuana is number two. And so when I was asking, have you drank any alcohol at all, probably, 80% of the room says yes. Well, roughly 17%, I want to say, of our campus identifies, yes, I have used marijuana in the last 30 days. So we go from 80% down to 17. All of the other drugs are in single digit, like 1% or less. So they're not very popular. So I come back to, why am I in college? My role here is to be successful. And I think with some of the other drugs, the ones that you mentioned, there's a little bit of fear of toxicity. There's some fear of deaths. The cannabis numbers, I think, are ticking up a little bit, not a lot. We don't perceive a lot of toxicity with cannabis products, and those products are now shifting and changing also in terms of how they are delivered to us in terms of preparation. So there's edibles, there's gum, it's not all, setting organic material on fire and, the smoke, which seems really bad. That kind of thing. So there are other things. And, I think that some the students that I've talked to, they're looking at, gosh, can I try these vaporizers? Can I try these edibles? And coming up with some reasons for why they're doing that. But it's not a very common, it's a pretty minimal of it. I think the big thing that's come out of it, like folks I've talked to in Colorado, were, which was one of the first states in 2014. There's a big uptick in public use. So the ones who are already doing it are continuing to do it. And of course, our big fear is if they're out in public and they're doing that, everybody else is gonna start doing it. And that's not the states that I've talked to, have not seen large upticks in that. There's some, enough for us to say we should continue to do the kinds of prevention work that we do. But probably not as much as what you might guess. If that answers your question.
I think to speak to that a little bit, so Jenny and I just got done, kind of poring over the survey data. And like similar to the numbers that Mark shared about alcohol, we asked students both their use and then how they perceive their peers using. And students always like think that 95% of the people around them are using marijuana. And it's really, I'm not gonna be able to remember the number and I don't know it yet, but it's really significant.
It's significant. Yeah, the perception is like 80% and the reality is 30%, something like, I think that's where it was at our campus or very close to that. And there are some campuses out there who are like, I don't want to tell anybody that 17% of our students are, smoking, but from a prevention aspect, it's an important number to look at, but it's not as high as what people think. All right, question.
Me.
Thanks, Julie.
I have two. Is there any, research in regards to college students and prescription drug use? And then when you work with students who, when you work with students or just in general, there's a huge uptick in antidepressants
Mhm.
and, anxiety meds. And is there the equivalent to educating people that are on psychotropic meds and
Also a good question. I think that as students go through the national assessment of college health behaviors, I got it right that time. There are a lot more questions in there about mental health and the prevalence of mental health issues and the use of mental health medication. There are a lot more questions in there. I don't recall anything coming out of there that was significant enough to say, this is something we should be having that conversation about. So I know that the students that I meet with, and when I get a chance to talk to our sort of subgroups, like our athletes or, folks in specific departments, or individually, for anybody who's coming in for an appointment, being able to have that conversation about the interaction between alcohol and medication, whatever that medication might be, the interaction between marijuana and medication, if that is a medication that they're using. So we take the opportunity to have that conversation, but I don't have. It was minimal on the notch. But it's a reality that if you're using marijuana or using alcohol or using any other kind of mood altering substance, even if it's by prescription, it is going to interact with any antidepressant. And that's a message I try to talk to people about individually, but I don't think they can.
I just think there's a desensitization
Yeah.
towards antidepressants, Like, oh. What do I want to say? It's more, I just think there's a desensitization between what antidepressants actually.
I absolutely agree. And I think out of the University of Washington, is that what Jason's on, right? They had some really good information about marijuana norms that is based on the science. You know, like what is high risk marijuana use? Can we define that? They have some good numbers for that. And what are the typical reasons I give for using it? And what are the withdrawal symptoms? And oddly enough, the withdrawal symptoms are almost the same as that list of problems I have for why I think I should use weed, right? I use weed because I'm anxious. Turns out marijuana makes you anxious, you know? And not a lot of folks understand that side. So I think we have some good information out there about that kind of stuff. And that rolls into the, you know, if you're dealing with anxiety and depression and you're using a medication, you're trying to manage what you're doing with something like marijuana or CBD or something like that, it may not be as successful as you think it is. You know, maybe in the moment, but what your question was about, is there data? That really is. So, all right, is that both your questions? Okay. Fair enough. Any more? Yes. Yeah.
From like a college student standpoint, someone who is on like antidepressants, like that conversation will come with your doctor, and not like all of them will affect with alcohol. Like I'm 25 and I'm on my health disorder alcohol if I want to, and it doesn't have an adverse effect. It all depends on like what medicine you're on, you know, the doses and that.
Yeah. That's a good point. That the effects vary based on what the substance is, but it also is impacted by the amount of alcohol that you consume for medicated and all of those things. So there is an interaction. Is it necessarily a negative interaction? Not all of them. So if that makes any sense. So like the high risk use is probably going to have more of an impact, I think, on the success of an antidepressant than normal use. But it is a good question to have with either a physician or me more accurately a pharmacist. All keepers of candies, all right? Yeah. It's a good point.
If I can add on that, it kind of brings to me the thought that like, I might go see several different medical providers. They may or may not have an updated chart about all of the medications that I have been on or currently
Yep.
am on.
Yep.
I think that we can do a lot in terms of like advocating for our patients by giving them the tools that they can research for themselves.
Yep.
What medicines they can have that have interactions, right? Because who's gonna be the best, most knowledgeable person about whether or not I take all of my antibiotics on time or whatever else I'm on right now? Like,
Yep.
it'll be me. Keep your one chart
That's
up
a
to
good point.
date.
Excellent. All right, I'm not seeing any more hands. So if you still got your phones, you're gonna want to get your camera out for my last slide, because it's a really important slide. And you're gonna want to take a picture of this. So tell me when you're ready. Because it's important. Okay, you ready? Go. Here are your campus resources. Hang on to these. So everybody should hang on to that information because you have folks who can be really helpful to you. Not only for yourself, but if you have some concern for a friend, because we talk a lot about that on our campus as well. So, and that is all I have.
Can we give Mark a round of applause?
Okay.
Brenda's gonna come up and she is going to share our prize winners. Students, we always draw your names and when you come, but I also, before we get to that, I don't want to forget that we have our own evaluation. So the one that we always have for the student support committee workshops, if you guys will pull out your phone one more time and let us know what you think. There's also the link at the bottom. The QR code isn't pulling up easy. You can use the SurveyMonkey link. It's very short. It's the same questions every time, but as a reminder to students, we pick our topics for the coming year off the feedback you give us. And this is that time of year for us where we're planning ahead. So if there are things that you like, topics you want to learn more about, things you want us to address here at the college, let us know in that survey too, and we'll do our best to address those things.
All right, gift card winners today are Bridget Nickman, Harley Zellers, and Will Baxter.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.